All right, the football regular season is over. You know what time it is. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, January 9th. Look at us. The gang is back together. Frank Stampfl joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Happy New Year, Scott. First and foremost, for the listening audience, what the heck are you wearing?
I got the meat sweats, Frank. That's what I'm wearing, like literal sweats depicting meat all over them. This was a gift from a Christmas gift from my brother-in-law, actually, who apparently takes my Twitter account very seriously, more seriously than anyone else on the face of this planet, because back in August, Frank, August 3rd specifically, a Braves reporter by the name of Lauren Jabara tweeted out a promotional item she received from Arby's, the meat sweats, which is a sweatsuit, again, depicting Arby's meats all over them. And I said, I tweeted out, I've never wanted anything more than I've wanted the meat sweats. And so that's what I got for Christmas. It is very much like, Cousin Eddie on Christmas Vacation, toward the end of Christmas Vacation, describing how, what he wants to happen to his boss when he's denied the Christmas bonus, and Cousin Eddie takes him very literally and does that exact thing. But in this case, it was my brother-in-law with the meat sweats. So now I got the meat sweats, and I got to find opportunities to wear them. So first day back, 2024 fantasy baseball today. Here you go, the meat sweats.
Kicking it off with a bang. Is that just a hoodie, or are there pants as well?
Oh, they're pants as well. Yeah, top and bottom.
Are you wearing the pants right now?
I'm not. Because nobody not wearing any pants. Yes, it is the old broadcaster cliche of wearing shorts on the bottom, but that's fine.
It's gonna make you stand up and model for everyone watching if you're wearing meat-covered sweatpants as well, but I will let you pass for now.
I feel like I need to share like my favorite Christmas gift now.
Uh-oh. Chris is rolling.
I got a little ho-ho. What are the Funko Pop? A little Swiss roll. So there you go. I got a little food-related Christmas. Yeah, I mean it kind of looks like a poop a little bit.
Yeah, well,
but,
I mean,
but he's look how happy he is.
I was very happy.
That is pretty awesome.
Even having had a bite taken out of him.
That is awesome indeed. Scott,
what did you get for Christmas, Frank?
Well, there's like
any novelty food items that you want to share?
My parents every year they get me this tin of popcorn that comes with the 3 flavors.
Oh yeah.
They do it. They've done it since I was a kid, and they're not stopping now. So, yes, if you're wondering about novelty food items, that's one of the things that I received.
What was on the outside of the tin? Was it like New York Jets football tin?
Santa. Just the classic Christmas stuff.
Right.
Pretty much it. Today on the show, by the way, we've got moves. Teoscar Hernandez signed with the Dodgers. Plus, we do have some smaller trades. We'll also be evaluating the first round in 2024, making the case for and against. I know some people don't want to hear about the first round. They want to hear about deep sleepers. Don't worry. We're going to get there. So we're going to start at the top, and we're going to work our way down to the tiers and the rankings and the sleepers and all that kind of fun stuff.
There's going to be like 90 episodes of this show between now and the start of the season.
Oh, yeah.
No complaining. All right.
No complaining. We'll leave the complaining to March. I'm sure there will be a ton of that. Let's start with the news and notes. And Teoscar Hernandez signed a 1-year, $23.5 million deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers. That's right. They're back at it with Ohtani at DH. Looks like Teoscar Hernandez is projected to slot in as the starting left fielder. And a little update on the top 6 in their lineup. Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani, Will Smith, Max Muncy, Teoscar Hernandez. That is pretty awesome. Hernandez, 31 years old, coming off a solid season, hit 258, 26 homers, 93 RBI, 7 steals. StatCast data looks really good, but power metrics are starting to take a little bit of a step back. 31 years old. I think he's still fine. ADP over the past month is 147.8 as the 33rd outfielder off the board. Scott, my guess is that Teoscar Hernandez will climb. I'm not sure how much he will climb, but he will climb.
I mean, he's climbing quite a bit for me. I was probably below the consensus there. I thought Teoscar Hernandez's last couple years were disappointing. You know, he's still good enough that he was worth starting even in 3 outfielder leagues, but he, you know, his OBP the last 2 years is like 310. Not that that's like the end all be all for fantasy stats, but like it is an indication that this player is maybe not the offensive standout that his reputation would suggest he is. But now you take him out of Seattle, not such a great place to hit. You put him in Los Angeles, the second best home run park for right-handed hitters the last 3 years, not to mention the supporting cast he's now. Like Teoscar Hernandez is now like the right-handed counter punch to that Freddie Freeman and Shohei Ohtani. You got Will Smith there. I know you got Mookie Betts, but he's at the top of the lineup. Like they needed that right-hander there to make their lineup not so lefty heavy. And you got to feel like that's going to position Teoscar Hernandez for potentially some huge RBI totals. Like he is stepping into the role that made JD Martinez a fantasy standout last year. And frankly, I don't think Teoscar Hernandez has as far to go to reclaim his fantasy value as JD Martinez did at this time a year ago. So yeah, you said he's going 33rd. He's been going 33rd among outfielders in early mock drafts. I think he's back in the top 30 now. And I went from being pessimistic about Teoscar Hernandez to now optimistic about him for 2024.
I will say, I don't know how much improvement I would expect on his counting stats from last year, when he had 93 RBI, what was it, 70 runs, maybe more runs, although the low OBP is going to hold him back there. But like, he's going to go from batting 4th and 5th primarily to, like you said, maybe 6th or 7th. And so he's going to lose some plate appearances. He played 160 games last season. It's asking a lot for him to repeat that. So I'm not saying that the arrow's not pointing up from the baseline that existed before this signing. I'm not sure. Like, it's pretty rare to primarily hit in the bottom third of the lineup or the bottom half of the lineup and drive in 100 runs. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. And if it were to happen, this is a lineup where it would happen. But like,
I will point out, JD Martinez drove in 103 runs in 113 games last year. So nearly an RBI a game.
Yeah.
For JD Martinez. And that was before Ohtani was part of the mix.
Exactly. That was before Ohtani too. So I hear what you're saying, Chris. Like, you don't want to really project more than 93 RBI for Teoscar Hernandez, but man, if there's any lineup that could pull off something outlier in the bottom half, like 110 plus RBI, it would be this lineup.
Yeah, that's fair.
And last thing I'll point out, Scott, you touched on this a little bit, just the ballpark change. Looking at StatCast park factors, going from Seattle, they ranked 18th in home run factor, going to Dodger Stadium, which is 2nd. So again, that could also just improve the baseline. Maybe you project closer to 30 home runs, or maybe there's a chance Teoscar Hernandez could get to 35 home runs this season. I don't think
that hits the ball very hard.
Yeah, I don't think that's out of the question here in 2024. Let's move over to Sean Manaea, who agreed to a 2-year, $28 million deal with the New York Mets. The money, a little bit surprising for me, considering Manaea hasn't exactly been good over the past 2 years. Those who have listened to the podcast the past few years, by the way, I've been duped by Sean Manaea before, and it might be happening again. Manaea is coming off a season with the Giants where he was split between starting and as a reliever. He had a 4.44 ERA, a 1.24 WHIP. Obviously not great. Did put up a career high 9.8 K per 9. Why am I looking to get duped again? Well, Manaea did do some interesting things. The fastball velocity was up over 2 miles per hour from 91.3 miles per hour in 2022 to 93.6 miles per hour in 2023. He also introduced a new sweeper that he used 10% of the time, and it was a really good pitch for him. 140 batting average against, 35% whiff rate. Chris, the problem is that it didn't really matter. It didn't amount to better production. I think there are some things that could change, get rid of his traditional slider and just use like a fastball, sweeper, and changeup. And maybe that can help Sean Manaea, have his best season. there are some interesting things, but he's going really late anyway. Is there any interest in Sean Manaea as a starter in 2024?
So I think there are a couple things to look at here. One is he's cheap enough that who cares? Like it's, if his price doesn't rise very much, then who cares? It's your last pick. You're playing in a 450 player draft. He's still one of your last picks. Like there is very little cost here. We are talking, it is worth noting, about a guy who's going to be 32 in 24 days, who has exactly a league average ERA over the course of his career, has one season with an ERA plus better than 105 in more than 29 and 2/3 innings, excuse me. Need to be very careful here. And also he stopped throwing the sweeper in the second half in September. He threw, I think, one in the month of September, through two, excuse me. So, and I think the other thing to keep in mind is he's a lefty, and sweepers are primarily very, very good weapons to same-handed hitters. And they tend to get crushed by opposite-handed hitters. So I don't know how much a lefty adding a sweeper necessarily changes how I feel about them, especially when Manaea is just, we've done this so many times where it's like,
yep.
But from July 2nd to September 3rd, and it's like, well, yeah, but then you zoom out and we've got 1,000 inning sample here of a 4.10 ERA pitcher and 8.3 K per nine. And that's not to say he's not valuable in baseball. That's not to say that it's not a decent signing even for the money. I mean, who cares? It's a team with ostensibly unlimited money. It's just, I put together my list of sleepers for 2024. I did not even consider Sean Manaea. And that's not to say he can't be useful. It's just, I'm probably going to come across 25 starting pitchers drafted outside of the top 200 that I'd rather have. And that might be a low number.
I'll just add, I mean, I'm not sure there's much to add to that. But,
dump on Sean Manaea.
Well, in case you are trying to look at, see the glass half full here, by looking at some of his 2023 data, prior to September, he went 5+ innings 3 times. Mm-hmm. You said he split between starting rotation and the bullpen. Well, even when he was starting, it was not like a true starting role for Sean Manaea. So they really let him air it out for 3 innings at a time, the Giants did, and all that resulted from that was a mid-4s ERA. I'm with Chris. I just think if you're looking to gamble on upside, there are much better choices out there than Sean Manaea.
You guys are right. You guys are probably right when it comes to Sean Manaea. Just some interesting things that I noted. And last point on him, he made 10 starts, and in the 10 starts, he was actually worse than he was as a reliever last year. A 4.82 ERA, a 1.35 WHIP in those starts. So for whatever it's worth, the current Mets rotation, by the way, after missing out on Yamamoto, Kodai Senga, Jose Quintana, Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, Adrian Hauser. Yikes. Speaking of the Mets, they signed Harrison Bader to a 1-year, $10.5 million deal. Not sure there's much here either. Bader will play center field, which slides Brendan Nimmo over to left field. Bader still does provide speed. He had 20 steals in 98 games in 2023, but it comes with a low batting average. He's dealt with a bunch of injuries. His ADP over the past month is 405 as the 100th outfielder off the board. Scott, does this matter at all? Harrison Bader to the Mets.
Probably not. I was mad at myself for writing this up in the off-season tracker because I try to set a certain standard of relevance so that I don't go totally crazy and I'm reacting to every single minor move that happens. For some reason, I reacted to this Harrison Bader signing. I mean, because of his defense, you can count on him playing close to every day for the Mets, and he has been running more in recent years. So maybe as like a cheap steal source in deep 5 outfielder leagues, Harrison Bader is worth drafting. But, you can't expect much more than 10 to 12 home runs, and the batting average probably is going to be nothing to write home about. And it's overall, the package isn't that impressive.
It's a big upgrade for the Mets outfield defense. I would say if there's any impact here, it's probably just sliding Nimmo over to a corner and getting Bader, who's a very good defensive center fielder. It will make this team's outfield defense much better.
Yeah, that's a fair point. For the games that he's healthy, again, Bader has dealt with a lot of injuries, but Brandon Nimmo actually graded out as a pretty good fielder too, and now he's moving over to the corner. So pretty good defense there for the New York Mets. Let's get into the trades. A bunch of them happened on Friday. I'm not sure that any of them have massive significance for fantasy, but the Giants acquired Robbie Ray from the Mariners in exchange for Mitch Haniger and Anthony DeSclafani. Robbie Ray recovering from Tommy John surgery, hoping to return in the second half of the season. So not really much to do, I guess, in a redraft league, but if you play in a keeper or a dynasty league where a player's value carries over from one year to the next, Robbie Ray, I think, is a name you should remember towards the end of your draft and maybe select him and just kind of stash him on your IR, and he could become a good keeper for 2025. So,
I mean, he won the Cy Young 2 years ago, and he was pretty good. Well, I guess 3 years ago, because it's new year. I don't know if you guys know, it's 2024. It was 2021 when Robbie Ray won the Cy Young, and he was also pretty darn good in 2022, his first year with the Mariners. And I mean, just from a real world perspective, I found it surprising from the Mariners end, almost like they just need to get that money off the books, and they're pitching so good they could afford to pass up whatever Robbie Ray is when he returns. I mean, come mid-season, Robbie Ray could be a pretty big deal again in fantasy, and Giants have a good track record with veteran pitchers. So yeah, just a name you don't want to forget about no matter how you look at it.
I think also if Jerry DiPoto goes like 4 weeks without making a trade, his skin starts to itch. And so I think that might be part of it.
Yeah, Robbie Ray, by the way, does have a player option after 2024 that equals 2 years, $50 million. My guess is he's probably going to be in San Francisco in both 2025 and 2026 as well. The other side of the deal, the Mariners received Mitch Haniger, who looks like he's penciled into their starting right field job. He's been limited to a total of 118 games over the past 2 years, constantly dealing with injuries. But it was back in Seattle, I think probably 3 or 4 years ago now.
2021.
When he had that monster season, 39 homers, 100 RBI. Yeah, I'm not sure how much that matters at this point. And then Anthony DeSclafani, he's also been crushed by injuries the past 2 years. I don't know if he'll be healthy. I don't know if they view him as a starting pitcher, but
his swing man. They don't really have a spot for DeSclafani right now.
I was going to say, if he's healthy, I guess there's a chance that there's a battle between him and Brian Wu for the 5th starter job. I hope that doesn't happen because obviously Brian Wu has a bunch of sleeper appeal. Chris, any thoughts here? I guess probably Mitch Haniger is more likely to have fantasy value between the two.
Yeah, I would think so, just because Haniger is likely to open the season in a fantasy relevant role. And, if you're in a deeper league, I think there's a dice roll to be had there. I will say if you set the over-under at 14.5 starts for Anthony DeSclafani, if he's the next man up for them in the rotation, I'd probably take the over just because all those dudes are 24, 25, and 2 of them are probably going to suffer serious injuries because that's what happens to starting pitchers, especially when they're in their early to mid-20s. So I think we'll probably see more of DeSclafani than we want.
Mitch Haniger, by the way, the past 2 years, only batting .228 with a .686 OPS. The quality of contact is still there during that span. 91.5 average exit velocity, 11.4% barrel rate. So if he finds a way to stay on the field, it's not inconceivable that he can hit 25 home runs for the Mariners. But again, it's pretty far-fetched that Mitch Haniger will actually stay on the field. The Mariners also made another trade. They acquired Luke Raley from the Tampa Bay Rays for Jose Caballero. And Raley looks like the strong side platoon in left field. Pretty productive year for Tampa Bay. In 2023, he hit .249 with 19 homers, 14 steals, and .824 OPS. Pretty impressive quality of contact metrics as well. And the way things stand right now on Tampa Bay, it looks like it could be Taylor Walls and Caballero in a spring training battle for their starting shortstop job. Again, given everything that we know right now.
Maybe with a little sprinkle of Junior Caminero.
Maybe, yeah.
Who profiles more as a third base long term, but he has experience at shortstop in the minors, and certainly represents an upgrade offensively over those two. I don't think Luke Raley is very good. He does make hard contact, but he strikes out a ton, and most of his production last year came early on. In the second half, Luke Raley hit .219 with a .677 OPS. So I think for all of Jerry DePoto's maneuvering that day, it's not going to signify much.
I mean,
in fantasy.
I will say, I think there's a decent chance he's a net upgrade over. Oh my God, I'm Jared Kelenic. I don't know if that might be a hot take, but
he might just be Jared Kelenic.
Yeah, he might just be what they were going to get from Jared Kelenic before that trade.
Right, for whatever that's worth. But what I was going to say is what excites me about this trade is the opportunities it creates in Tampa Bay now that they don't have to find at-bats for Luke Raley. At-bats that can now go to Caminero, potentially, or Curtis Mead, bat first prospect who got a little bit of a look last year, or my personal favorite, Jonathan Aranda. I mean, they don't have a dedicated DH, so like Aranda and Curtis Mead, their issue is they don't really fit anywhere on the diamond, but they profile as excellent hitters. Aranda's production, in particular, in the minors last year was just off the charts. And because it's Tampa Bay, you can't expect any of them is just going to take the job and run with it, play every day. They're all going to be mixed in at different places on the diamond, but there's more opportunities for all of them now, and I think that's a net benefit for fantasy, getting Raley out of there.
And there is an opportunity available for potentially another player that the Rays acquired, because they made one final trade that day. They acquired outfielder Richie Palacios from the St. Louis Cardinals in exchange for reliever Andrew Kittredge. So Palacios, by the way, the final 32 games that he played with the Cardinals, he did some nice things. Obviously, it's a very small sample. He hit .258, 6 home runs, 2 steals, and .823 OPS, some pretty good numbers in the minors as well. Roster Resource, as of now, does have Richie Palacios as the strong side platoon at DH, but probably going to come down to a spring training battle between him and Aranda and whoever else can actually perform and hit well. The Rays just try to find hitters and create offense any type of way that they can. And just for the Cardinals bullpen, Ryan Helsley has dealt with injuries, and Giovanni Gallegos has been inconsistent the past couple of years. So it's not inconceivable that Andrew Kittredge kind of works his way in and has value at some point this year, but just a name to remember. Scott, anything on Richie Palacios working his way into that mix as well for Tampa?
I mean, I don't like him as much as the other guys I mentioned, so I would be kind of annoyed if he did. But
dude, he is such a Tampa Bay Rays player.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Just walks a ton, has never hit more than 6 home runs at any level, but probably I assume has very good batted ball metrics. This is such a Rays move, and he's going to get 400 plate appearances with like an 804 OPS. And there are going to be 14 different times this season when he hits a home run and Frank goes, "Do we need to start talking about Richie Palacios?"
And then you guys will probably laugh at me and tell me not to do that. Some other news here real quick. According to Jim Bowden, the Red Sox, Cubs, Angels, and Giants are all finalists for Japanese lefty Shota Imanaga. His posting window ends this Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, so something needs to be done by then, obviously. Tommy Edman underwent arthroscopic surgery on his right wrist in October, but expects to be ready for the start of spring training. MJ Melendez is slated to play primarily in the outfield in 2024, which is no surprise. 130 of his 148 games came in the outfield in 2023. Matt Vierling is the favorite to serve as the Tigers' starting third baseman to begin the 2024 season. And Scott, is that perhaps revealing that their prospects Colt Keith and or Justin Henry Malloy will not be on the opening day roster if Matt Vierling is starting at third base?
Well, Justin Henry Malloy, I think in the long run, they think of him as more of a left fielder. And there are questions about Colt Keith's eventual destination defensively too, whether he's a better fit at second base. He's kind of stretched anywhere you put him other than first base. So it could play out in a few different ways. That Matt Vierling is already being reported as the favorite, I don't take as an encouraging sign for either Keith's or Malloy's chances. But it'll all have to play out in spring training. And I think Colt Keith especially is the caliber of prospect where, you'd like to have him on the major league roster for his entire rookie season, so that if he is in the discussion for hardware for awards years in the next several years of his career, you have a chance of scoring draft picks because of that.
All right. The Red Sox are apparently listening to trade inquiries on both Kenley Jansen and Masataka Yoshida. And if you're wondering about saves in Boston, in case that move does happen, Chris Martin looks like the obvious next man up. I had Greg Jewett on a couple of weeks back, who specializes in closers and bullpens, and he kind of speculated on Garrett Whitlock as a name to watch there. So, he's been really good in the past. If they do trade Kenley Jansen, maybe it's Chris Martin or Garrett Whitlock as the next man up. The Yankees and Marcus Stroman have mutual interest. There were other reports that indicated the Yankees also have interest in Dylan Cease and Shane Bieber and Jesus Luzardo, and I guess any other pitcher that you can conceivably think of. And last but not least, Michael Brantley announced his retirement on Friday. Congrats to him on a successful career. Few quick notes. We are live on YouTube after a few months, and we'll be here 3 nights per week in January, and we'll remain live basically through the end of the baseball season. Obviously, if you want to listen to the podcast, that will be in the audio feed. But if you want to hang out with us live and hang out in the chat and, talk some crap and talk some smack with some of the other people that are here.
See the meat sweats.
You can see the meat sweats. That's exactly right. You can do so at youtube.com/fantasybaseballtoday. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Also, we have a 5-minute podcast called Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, which serves as a bit of a Spark Notes, as a summary to the full-length podcast. We will have 4 of those per week. Yeah, that's right.
Is that still a thing?
Cliff Notes. I don't know. Kind of got me through junior high school. We will have 4 of those 5-minute podcasts per week in the month of January, with bonus episodes dropped on Saturdays into the FBT feed. So if you ever see a 5-minute podcast in the Fantasy Baseball Today feed and trying to figure out what the heck is this, that's what it is. FBT in 5. Make sure to download and follow wherever you listen to this podcast. Let's take our first break. When we return, we will take a look at the 2024 first round here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Like a flying arrow. You with me? Absolutely on the money. Full speed here. We're racing. Oh, that was tight. Gotta go. And we are on. Just gotta get to the finish line here, guys. And now the party can really begin. Well done, guys. Yeah!
Welcome back in. And just before we get into the first round, I wanted to quickly point out some things that I found out, that I researched about the likelihood of your first round pick being a bust. And I asked you guys earlier in the day, how low does a first round pick have to finish to be considered a bust? And obviously there's no right answer, but
we were very unhelpful.
Yeah, very. But Chris threw out the top 75. So that's what I used here. I looked at first round.
Was Manny Machado a bust last year? Just as a intellectual exercise, would you consider Manny Machado the year he had to be?
No, I don't think so.
I wouldn't either.
It's tough.
Because
that's one of those things where probably not, right? You got 176 or 166 RBI, 30 home runs, he wasn't great.
And nobody's drafting him near round 1 this year.
But he didn't tank your team, though.
Right, exactly. But I think of a bust as somebody who was supposed to be good, but instead was bad. And Machado was still good. He just wasn't first round good.
I think it's just it's one of those things where it's also kind of it's an emotional question. And so if you still managed to finish in second place with Machado as your first round pick, he wasn't a bust. And if you finished in 8th, he definitely was a bust, even though he was the same player.
Mm-hmm. So he finished, according to the CBS 5x5 Roto algorithm, he finished 65th overall, Manny Machado did. So, yeah, I don't think that I would consider that a bust. And I guess even by these top 75 standards we just made up, he wasn't a bust either. Okay. I looked at the first round ADP over the past 3 years and then where they finished overall in each of those seasons. So during that span, 8 of 36 first-round picks by NFBC ADP finished outside of the top 75 in that respective season. So 8 of 36, that's 22%. So you figure on average 2 to 3 first-round picks will let us down, which makes sense.
Yeah,
not every player. Not every player in the first round is obviously going to hit. But I will say last year in particular, the fantasy community was spot on. The first round was awesome. The lowest finish was Vlad Jr., who finished 62nd overall. 9 of 12 first-round picks in 2023 finished as top 25 players. So just spot on. Good job overall by the fantasy community. We got that one right.
I wondered if Judge finished outside of that just because of the time he missed, but apparently not.
He finished 48th overall. So
there you go.
All right, let's get into the 2024 first round. The case for and against. I guess we could also talk about like upside versus downside with some of these players. But number one, no surprise, this is based on NFBC ADP. It's Ronald Acuña, 26 years old. He just finished as the first overall player in fantasy. 41 homers, 73 steals. He earned $71 worth of auction value in a 12-team league. Scott, I mean, you can make the case for. I think a more realistic question, Scott, is what is your projection for home runs and steals? He's 26, so like theoretically he could do this again, but like, what is your realistic expectation for him?
I don't think it's unrealistic to suggest he could do it again. I know he just did something nobody has ever done before, 40 home runs, 70 steals in a season, but I mean, we're kind of entering a new paradigm for stolen bases. We don't know exactly how it's going to play out from year to year, and more than any other player, Ronald Acuña seemed to relish taking advantage of the new pickoff rules, and I don't see why he'd stop doing that. I mean, he is as perfect of a number one overall pick, I think, as we've ever seen.
That was the question I was going to ask, because going through this, it's not that hard to come up with the case against a lot of these guys. It's incredibly different. Like Ronald Acuña will almost certainly not be as good in 2024 as he was in 2023. He just had one of the best fantasy seasons ever.
Maybe the best ever.
How far back do you have to go to where there was this? I saw Ariel Cohen tweeting about this in Kentucky Derby style. That's what it's called, right? KDS.
Yeah, that's where you choose which draft slot you want, or you put it in order.
You have a draft for your draft slot, basically.
Has there do we have to go back to peak Mike Trout?
Yes.
To where there was this obvious of a no, you want 1-1. You don't even think about, because I'm doing. We're all in the process of doing our salary cap values, and I think I have him like $7 clear of the next best player in both Roto and head to head.
Yeah,
that high.
Think about this.
That might be too low.
I've never seen this before. If you take the Steamer projections on Fangraphs and just plug it into their auction calculator there, Ronald Acuña is projected as a $59 player. The next closest hitter is Aaron Judge at $37. That is unheard of. I've never even seen projections like that.
And projection systems are supposed to be inherently conservative.
Yeah.
To put it in a way that's not so niche, and I've cited this stat a few times in the offseason, but I'm sure we have a bunch of people jumping in for the first time now that fantasy football's over.
Now that I'm back, really.
So the 40 home runs, 70 steals, it's easy to fixate on those for Acuña because obviously no player's done it before. But his runs scored, 149. They were the second most for any player since 1949.
Wow. Jeff Bagwell, right?
Yeah, Jeff Bagwell. And
look at that. Look at that.
Very good. And then Acuña also hit 337. Yeah. That would have led.
He had an 11% strikeout rate.
That would have, his batting average last year would have led the majors 3 of the past 5 years. So it's like he was ridiculous beyond just the home runs and the steals.
All right, we don't need to belabor the point, but can I belabor the point?
Please do.
Ronald Acuña scored 817 points in standard CBS scoring last season. Number 2 was Freddie Freeman at 666. Just doing a little off the top of the dome math, I believe that's a 150-point gap. Insane. That is the gap between Freddie Freeman and Pete Alonso, who was like the number 18 hitter last season in point. The only player I can remember topping 700 in the last few years was like one of those Justin Verlander years in Houston.
Mm-hmm. So that is the case for Ronald Acuña. I guess the case against, I wrote down a few things here. I guess it would have to be injury related, right? He
could get hurt.
He had a torn ACL a few years back.
There were a lot of scares last year.
Yeah,
there were a lot of like, oh no, not Ronald Acuña, and then he was fine.
Yeah, that seems to be his whole career. Yeah. Ronald Acuña has a tendency to have very big reactions to being hit by a pitch.
He's got a low threshold for pain.
Yeah. I think it's also possible the plate discipline regresses. Chris, you mentioned the strikeout rate. I mean, it was otherworldly. If it does come down, maybe he's more of like the 280 hitter he was before 2023, which with his power and speed would still make him, I think, the pretty clear-cut first overall player. But let's move on to number 2. Again, we do have to move a little bit quicker than we just did, so keep that in mind. We've got like 2 to 3 minutes per player, basically. Number 2 is Julio Rodriguez. And Chris, I will let you start with the case for Julio Rodriguez.
He's a preternaturally talented young player who has overcome poor plate discipline to be an elite fantasy option 2 years in a row, and has also overcome slow starts 2 years in a row, which I think bodes well for the ability to make adjustments. And if that strikeout rate gets to like 21%, you're talking about potentially even another level that he could go to. 40-40 is not likely. It's on the table for Julio Rodriguez. And that's not something that you can say for more than 4 players.
Yeah. Julio Rodriguez went 28-25 as a rookie, followed that up with 32-37 as a sophomore. Hits the ball extremely hard. I'm with you, Chris. I think the upside case here is Julio Rodriguez, if everything breaks right, could go 40-40 in 2024. Scott, you get the ungodly task of making the case against Julio Rodriguez.
Well, it's hard to make a case that he's going to be a bust outright, but the case against Julio Rodriguez is just that he might drive you a little crazy relative to some of the other players you would consider in this range. Personally, I have Bobby Witt second overall. But I mean, to put it in perspective, as late as, let's see if I can find a good example here. As late as June 23rd, Julio Rodriguez was hitting 237. Now, by the end of August, he had gotten that up to 286, which was actually higher than his rookie season. It ended up at 275 in part because Julio Rodriguez ended the year in a 6-for-53 slump. So, you know, he was hovering around a little over the Mendoza line for most of the first half, and really just got burning hot for a 2-month stretch, basically. And that was the majority of his production. And his rookie season kind of played out similarly, where people were thinking he was a bust for the first couple months, and then Julio Rodriguez caught fire. So I guess that would be the downside case for him. You could ask for a player who's in a better lineup too, but you know, he's still.
But we'll save that case for the next guy.
103 runs, 102 runs, 103 RBI for Julio Rodriguez last year. So I don't think that's that big of a deal.
So let's move on to the number 3 player, who is Bobby Witt Jr. Yeah. Scott, you just said you have him as your number 2 player. So I think you could pretty easily make the case for Bobby Witt.
Yeah. So Ronald Acuña became the 3rd player in history to reach 30 homers and 50 steals in a season. Bobby Witt came within 1 steal of being the 4th player to do that. It really breaks my heart that he didn't get that 50th steal. But it just goes to show you that Bobby Witt had a historic season himself, and it was just overshadowed by what Acuña did. And, you know, as good as he was, 276 batting average, his expected batting average, I believe it was over 300. It
was like 296.
Okay, so he underperformed his expected stats. And, you know, that was with, gosh, what did he hit in the second half? He had 301 in the second half. So like he was trending as good as his overall numbers were. He was even better in the second half, and the expected numbers say he could be even better. He doesn't need to be any better to justify the second overall pick with that home run and steals production. But like Bobby Witt is a total absolute stud, and everybody who drafted him in the first round last year was right, even though I told people they shouldn't.
All right. Let's probably make the case against, Chris, which is where you will come in. You kind of mentioned it a little bit on the, I guess, the team context on Bobby Witt.
Yeah, I think that's the most obvious place where he falls short of the rest of the first rounders is just, I don't know. The Royals might be competitive this season. I don't see much reason to think that they're going to have even better than an average offense.
He plays to Justin Mason.
He plays in a poor home park. There's the context around Bobby Witt is poorer than it is for, I think, any other first round caliber player. Certainly the guys that we're going to talk about today. There's also just, it's not that he swings and misses a lot. He certainly doesn't strike out very much. 21% as a rookie, 17.4% last year. He's just a very aggressive hitter. And so I do think, one, that drives the walk rate down in a way that's hard to overcome. Mm-hmm. He makes so much contact, and that contact tends to be good that it's not really a trade-off you struggle with. But that 50 steal number would be a little easier to get to if the OBP was average, as opposed to slightly below average. That's he's got bigger holes in his real life game, I think, than anyone else in this range. I think Julio Rodriguez is kind of there as well, but the raw skills are so strong that it's hard to hold it against him too much. I think it's a tier of 2 behind Ronald Acuña for me.
Because of the plate discipline issues there for Bobby Witt and a lesser extent Julio Rodriguez, I think both are second rounders in points league. They go from being obvious top 3 picks in Roto to, in my mind, like early second rounders in points leagues, in part because the top tier of hitters just in general is so deep that it's easy to fixate on their shortcomings in that scoring format. But, you know, with their steals production, it's just in 5x5 categories, Roto leagues, like that's just too valuable with everything else that Bobby Witt and Julio Rodriguez provide.
Speaking of steals, the number 4 player in ADP is Corbin Carroll, who just had 54 stolen bases. He hit 285, 25 homers, finished as the 5th overall player in fantasy, the unanimous National League Rookie of the Year. Chris, I might have already done it for you, but the case for Corbin Carroll being the 4th overall pick.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is just he was 22 years old. He was the top prospect in baseball, and he more than lived up to expectations. I think he's probably someone who making the case against him may be a little easier than making the case for him, but 25 homers, 55 stolen bases as a rookie, like, even if the underlying numbers don't necessarily back it up, I don't know how much I worry about that with a guy who's as young and as talented as Corbin Carroll. Like, I think the production the underlying stats will catch up to the production more likely than not. But like, does he maybe max out as a 25 homer guy rather than a 30 homer guy? I think that's possible. But yeah, he's a 5 category stud who will likely drive in more runs than he did last year as well.
Scott, I've been on record saying that I will have Corbin Carroll a little bit lower in my first round rankings just because I'm worried about some of the shoulder stuff that popped up last year. It seems like that's a pretty big reason for the case against Corbin Carroll.
Yeah, so of the players we've gone through so far, this is the first one that actually gives me like a worry, and it's that Corbin Carroll left the game like twice in the span of a week last July, grabbing his surgically repaired shoulder, and we thought he was done for the year, and he wasn't done for the year. He was back in a matter of days. One of those times, I think he was back the very next day. And so it seems like water under the bridge now, but over the final 2 months of the season, he homered just 4 times. He did add 2 home runs in the postseason, 2 home runs in 17 postseason games, which isn't, like an amazing rate either. So, in 3 months, he hit 6 home runs, Corbin Carroll. And so even without considering the impact the shoulder had on that power production, I would say Corbin Carroll's projected power output is among the lowest among first rounders. And then you add that concern on top of it, and it's like there's genuine bust potential here. I'm not saying Corbin Carroll is a bust, but you could see it happening.
And I think he is more so than Rodriguez and Witt. He is more of a jack of all trades rather than like Rodriguez and Witt hit the ball really, really hard. They have maybe not top of scale power, but they have well above average raw power. Corbin Carroll's more about maximizing what he has. And he's young enough that he could fill out and he hit for power in the minors throughout his career. So we're nitpicking.
With the that's this exercise, right? Because we're talking about first rounders.
Yeah.
Stolen bases. Like, really, what clinches Corbin Carroll's spot this high in the rankings is the fact that he's a 50 steal guy. And just 50 steal guys prior to this past year, 50 steal guys didn't really exist, and certainly not from first round caliber bats. And so now that you have guys who can really hit and also steal that many bases, you're almost like obligated to draft them this early in Roto. Even recognizing in Corbin Carroll's case that he'll probably be closer to 20 home runs than 30.
All right, let's take our final break. When we return, we'll get into the rest of the first round here on Fantasy Baseball Today.
Out there are two colossal beings, both forces of nature in their own regard. But in here, as soon as the chute bursts open, the duality of man and beast begins to fade. This is the PBR on CBS Sports Network.
Welcome back in. We're making the case for and against players in the first round. The top 4 picks, according to ADP: Ronald Acuña, Julio Rodriguez, Bobby Witt Jr., and Corbin Carroll, which brings us to number 5, Mookie Betts, who will be leading off for a lineup that includes Freddie, Freeman, Shohei Ohtani, now Teoscar Hernandez. Scott, the case for Mookie Betts at number 5.
The case for him is he's hitting ahead of Freddie, Freeman, and Shohei Ohtani, and is probably going to score a zillion runs because of it. There's just not a better lineup spot in baseball, and obviously it's come through for Betts the past 2 years in a huge way. 126 runs this past year, 117 runs the year before. He's not a big base stealer anymore, but the power production has actually been climbing as he's been getting older. And the production has been there, and there's no reason to think it won't be there next year. And you add on top of it, he's now dual eligible second base in addition to the outfield. So Mookie Betts is Mookie Betts.
Mookie Betts, 233 runs plus RBI before the addition to the Dodgers lineup. Again, he did that in 2023. Chris, the case against Mookie Betts at number 5.
The case against would probably just be that before last season, the batting average had been in real decline, and it looked like he was no longer a legitimate plus in that category. He was more someone who kept you afloat. And that's kind of where he's been with stolen bases. And he's 31 years old. He'll be 32 probably before the Dodgers season ends this year. It's October 7th is his birthday, so they got to make it out of the first round for that to be true. I think we're all expecting that, despite the way the last few seasons have gone. But yeah, I think it's just that if the power's not elite, which it was last season, does he do enough else well to be a standout? Probably yes. But, if there's any sort of age related decline, then it starts to get a little hairier. That being said, you generally don't profit from betting against Hall of Famers. Like, Hall of Famers have different aging curves, and Mookie Betts is a Hall of Famer.
Well, I would just say that Mookie Betts has set a career high in home runs each of the last 2 seasons, and his elite top 5 status is more dependent on his power production now. And just law of averages tells me that he's not going to set a career high in home runs for a 3rd straight season. Yeah. So,
but he did.
That's my downside case.
I do buy the power because it came with him putting in the work with Driveline in the offseason last year, and vastly improved quality of contact across the board. But yeah, any regression there, it starts to get a little hairy as a top 5 pick.
All right. Well, number 6 is Kyle Tucker, and he's been incredibly consistent the past couple of years. Between 29 and 30 home runs, 3 years in a row, 25 plus steals, 2 years in a row. Scott, I will go back to you to make the case for, because frankly, I want Chris to make the case for number 7. So you get Kyle Tucker, the case for.
Well, the case for Kyle Tucker, and I would take Freddie Freeman over him for what it's worth, it is that he is, once you get past the potential 40 to 50 steal guys at the top of round 1, Kyle Tucker is probably the next best power speed threat. It's more like 30-30, but it's still numbers that the kind of numbers you shoot for in the first round. And after a 2022 season in which we had questions about Kyle Tucker's batting average potential, he bounced back to hit 284. So 2 of the last 3 years now, he's hit 284 or better. And that's more in line with the strikeout numbers we've seen from Kyle Tucker, which are very low. It seems like contact hitting should be, like hitting for average should be an expectation for Kyle Tucker now moving forward, in addition to that power speed output. So while he is behind those like super studs at the top of round 1, he's probably the next best thing.
And he finally moved up in the Astros lineup too, which paid off with 209 runs plus RBI, which was, I'm saying this very certainly, but I don't know it for sure. I would venture to say that's a career high for Kyle Tucker if you're combining both those numbers together. Chris, Kyle Tucker here, the case against at number 6.
One, I think it's just he's probably the worst hitter of this first round contingent. Like, he's more of a high 800s OPS guy. Maybe Julio Rodriguez and Bobby Witt are probably in that same range. So, but he also really gets the most out of his sprint speed. He is 32nd percentile in sprint speed right now. With a new manager in place, are the Astros going to run as much? I think that's an open question. And, if he's more like an 18 to 20 stolen base guy, then you probably need him to start hitting more like 35 homers. And that's not really something he's shown he can do. He's another guy who it's more of a jack of all trades, master of none type of profile.
I did see a report recently that the Astros want to run more under Joe Espada. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but I guess take that for what it's worth. I don't think Kyle Tucker could actually provide more steals than he has, but maybe it just gives you a little bit more safety and, when projecting the stolen bases out for Kyle Tucker. The number 7 player is Fernando Tatis. And of course, I wanted Chris to make the case for, because Chris was all over Tatis last year. Chris, will you be all over him again at number 7?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's possible that coming back from the suspension and the wrist surgery last year, I think he was also coming off shoulder surgery, although that was a little more further removed. It's possible he's just not the same guy, but I think the case is very similar to Ronald Acuña, where we have an established track record of a guy who was very clearly on a Hall of Fame trajectory. He came back from a weird season, different circumstances. Obviously, Ronald Acuña was coming back from a torn ACL. Fernando Tatis coming back from a not imposed, but whatever the term would be, steroid suspension, and also all of the injuries that were at least partially his own fault as well. Don't ride motorcycles. But we know that this guy has been arguably one of the 3 or 4 best hitters in baseball in the very, very recent past. Now it's back to 2021 at this point, but remember, that was 42 home runs and 25 stolen bases with a 282 batting average and 975 OPS. I don't think anybody should be surprised if he gets back to that mark. And it's another guy where 40-40 is on the table, given the change in rules. So yeah, I think if we're talking about Fernando Tatis as the 1B this time next year, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
All right.
Are you going to rank Fernando Tatis in your top 5?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yep, he is number 5 for me. Now, I think there's a tier of 2 with Julio Rodriguez and Bobby Witt at 2 and 3 in Roto. I think after that, it's like a tier of 4 or 5. So I'm not like way out ahead on Fernando Tatis. I have him with basically the same value in a salary cap draft as Corbin, Carroll, Kyle Tucker, and Mookie Betts. But yeah, he's number 5 for me.
Scott, of all the names that we've talked about so far, you might have the most reasons or the biggest case, I guess, to make against Fernando Tatis going at 7th overall.
Yeah, so I would start with Fernando Tatis hit 225 with a 665 OPS in the second half last year. You make the comparison with Ronald Acuña. Well, I mean, it was shoulder surgery, it was wrist surgery, and it was the PED suspension for Tatis. 3 things that individually would cause us to wonder about a player's future power production. When Ronald Acuña with the torn ACL, that's not really going to make you question future power production. And then, lo and behold, Tatis mostly fell short in terms of power output this past year. So I rank him 8th. We're kind of doing this exercise where we're giving kind of the stock answer for why he'll live up to this draft spot and why he won't, as opposed to giving our personal take for what we think is going to happen. I would say I'm not quite as optimistic as Chris that Tatis will, bounce back with a better 2024. I mean, I say bounce back, but he had 25 homers, 29.
Yeah, still pretty good.
First round caliber player either way, I think. But I do have questions. About whether Tatis can get back to being who he was in 2021, which obviously would have, had him and Acuña in a neck and neck battle for best player in fantasy.
Do you know what Ronald Acuña's OPS in 2022 was after July 1st?
Gonna guess it wasn't very good.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah,
friend. 728 OPS for our guy Ronald Acuña. Look, I can obviously see the downsides with Fernando Tatis. I think, and look, the upside for him might not be that much higher than it is for Julio Rodriguez or Bobby Witt. So like the case for him is a little harder to make when there's other guys with that same profile. But I think we've seen the higher upside from him.
Yeah, I think the upside for Tatis is the number 2 player, right? It's like you just can't put anyone's upside on the same level as Acuña for obvious reasons. But you're talking about outside of Acuña, who has the most upside. I would argue Tatis has is among that level with J-Rod and Bobby Witt Jr. We have about 5 minutes left, and we have 5 players left to talk about. So you guys will get to make the case for and against each player that I assign you. And Scott, you are up with Spencer Strider at number 8. First, make the case for, and then make the case against Spencer Strider.
The case for Spencer Strider is he might be the closest thing we have to an ace in this current pitching environment, which is aceless. He was well ahead of every pitcher in strikeouts last year. I think nearly 50 more than everybody. He had 3 more wins than any pitcher last year, which might not be the most repeatable stat, but he has the Braves offense backing him. So, there's a lot of win potential there for Strider. And just the advantage he's going to give you in strikeouts. If you're going to sell out for anything at starting pitcher, that's what it should be for. So that's the case for Strider. The case against is that he's a pitcher. And there are there are almost 2 rounds worth of first round caliber bats. And then there's a big drop off after that. And you probably want to secure, you want to gather those bats while they're available to you, and then maybe turn your attention to pitching after that. Pitching is obviously inherently volatile. We don't know that Strider can replicate this kind of workload year after year. And so those would be the reasons to avoid him. I probably will avoid him in round 1, even though he will rank in that range for me.
One of those very clear first round caliber bats is Freddie Freeman, who is going 9th overall. Chris, the case for and the case against Freddie Freeman.
I think the case for him is just points at stat page. I mean, like he's basically a perfect hitter. Like, what does Freddie Freeman not do at like at least a B+ or A- level? He's not even that fast, and he stole 23 bases last season because he's such a smart, heady runner, and he has been his whole career. Last year was a career high 2 years in a row now, but he's always stolen more bases than you would think, and it's always been a nice bonus. The case against him is he's 34 years old, and how much can you rely on a 34-year-old to be a metronomic exemplar of consistency? And can we expect 23 stolen bases? I would think more like 15 from Freddie Freeman. And if there's any loss in bat speed, we've seen like Paul Goldschmidt, the end of his run as an elite player. He kept putting up really, really good seasons, but there were definitely some ups and downs along the way as he figured out how to age. And so, it could be that kind of thing where we see a down season from Freddie Freeman, then a bounce back. That wouldn't surprise me, but there's a lot of age-related risk there.
All right, the number 10 player right now in fantasy is Trea Turner. And Scott, this one is a pretty fun one, the case for and the case against Trea Turner.
I just want to say Freddie Freeman's the most underranked player here by ADP. He's my 5th overall guy.
I'm going to have him top 5 as well.
Okay, so Trea Turner, case for, is that over the final 2 months, he hit 317 with 16 homers and a 1,000 OPS. The case against is that he hit 242 with a 673 OPS in the first 4 months. I think, and I was pretty down on Trea Turner for most of last year. Certainly by the time August came around and his numbers were still where they were, batting average below 250. I was kind of writing him off as a potential first rounder for 2024. But there were some underlying changes in the final 2 months that make me think Trea Turner, that the turnaround was something that'll stick for him. You look really deep in the plate discipline numbers. He was chasing less. And I think that kind of goes along with the narrative of him putting pressure on himself first year in a new place, a big contract, that he would be more aggressive at the plate in a way that was detrimental to him. And he kind of got that under control over the final 2 months and looked more like Trea Turner. He is getting older, in his 30s now, and his skill set, certainly being as dependent on base running as it's been, it might not age as well as we'd like. And plus, being a standout base stealer isn't as unique to Trea Turner among first rounders as it used to be. But I don't know, 10th overall, it's hard to make too big of a case against him.
He's so interesting, Trea Turner, in that he's still 99th percentile sprint speed, and we saw him run wild in the postseason. I think if he wanted to, he could steal 50, 40, 50 bases, but it just doesn't really seem to be part of his game as much anymore. Again, like his upside case, I think he could get like 25 homers, 40 plus steals. But again, that's kind of painting the glass half full there for Trea Turner. Number 11 is Aaron Judge, who was hampered by a toe injury this past season, limited him to 106 games. Chris, the case for and against Aaron Judge.
I had a little whoopsie doodle earlier in the podcast because I said that the last Ronald Acuña had 800 plus points in CBS standard scoring, and that was a ridiculously good season. And I said that nobody had 700 plus since like Justin Verlander, one of his Houston years. That was a lie. Aaron Judge had 713 last year. That is the highest, I believe. I just went through our system, removes players who have retired. So it's possible that someone, Albert Pujols at his peak, was in that range. But we're talking about like nobody who is currently active except for Ronald Acuña has had a better season than Aaron Judge did 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And last year, the quality of contact was arguably even better, which is pretty terrifying to think about. He struck out a little more last season, but average exit velocity was actually up to 97.6 miles per hour, that's an average. His hard hit, his barrel rate was 27.5%. Like the quality of contact metrics were actually better last season. So there's not much indication that the skill set was lacking, and he was still on a 50 homer pace. He's the only player I think who has a realistic shot in any given year at 55 or 60 home runs. the case against is he's 31 now and he's 282 pounds. And we've already seen him miss a ton of time in his career. And the one exception was, the MVP season. So it might just be asking too much for him to play 150 games.
The number 12 player, we're wrapping up back-to-back Yankees here. Gerrit Cole, Scotty, the case for and the case against.
The case for is that Gerrit Cole is old reliable at a position that made you want to rip out your hair last year because of how unreliable it was basically at every level of the position. Gerrit Cole was the most bankable pitcher and has been really since he joined the Astros in 2018. The case against drafting Gerrit Cole here is that he's a pitcher. And, what I was saying about Spencer Strider earlier, I just don't think it's the best use of draft capital. Also, while Gerrit Cole was more reliable than pitchers in general, he didn't quite live up to his previous standards. He struck out only 9.6 per 9 after being more like 11.6 per 9 for most of that stretch that began in 2018. His swinging strike rate was down about 3 percentage points too. He just didn't, by the underlying metrics, Gerrit Cole didn't seem as dominant, and it makes you wonder if he kind of got away with something. The track record is what it is, and the pitching landscape is what it is. So I'm not dinging him too hard for that, but I don't personally think I would draft Gerrit Cole 12th overall, just like I wouldn't personally draft Spencer Strider 8th overall.
All right, we started this exercise by mentioning an average of 2 to 3 players are likely to bust in the first round. So we'll just wrap up with give me the 3 players who, of all the names we talked about today, you think are most likely to be a bust. And I'll just kick it off. For me, it's Corbin Carroll. It's injury related, the shoulder. He was fine in the postseason. Look, he could completely make me look foolish if he stays healthy. I realize that. Fernando, Tatis, there are just a lot of moving parts, I guess, some risk factors with him. And I guess I'll kind of take the easy way out. I'll say either pitcher, just because they're a pitcher. But Gerrit Cole might actually be more likely. The age, velocity, fastball dropped 1 mile per hour year over year. Some of the underlying numbers don't really line up with him just having his best season ever and winning the Cy Young. So he was awesome. I don't want to downplay that. But some of the underlying stuff just doesn't really line up. So those are the ones I think are most likely. Chris, how about for you?
I'll kind of just default to the older guys. So Freddie, Freeman, Aaron Judge, and either starting pitcher. But I think I agree with Gerrit Cole. It's funny. He went from kind of underperforming his expected ERA for a couple of years because of home run issues to then way overperforming last season. I think his ERA was like almost a run better than most of his metrics. And that might be sustainable, but given his age, given the apparent dip in skill set, I'll say he's a little more likely to bust than Spencer Strider.
All right, Scott, you wrap us up. Take us home. 3 players most likely to be a bust.
And remember, we're holding this to you to this.
Yeah,
and in October,
I was just going to say, we're clearly playing devil's advocate here. And I'm
writing this down. I'm scratching it in my desk as we speak.
You can't draft any of these players, Scott. If you do, I'll call you out. I'll make fun of you.
You're saying they're terrible.
I'm going to say, and I'm kind of just playing some hunches here. I'm going to say Mookie Betts. I'm going to say, just from the perspective he doesn't, his power production drops off. Spencer Strider. And I'm going to say Trey Turner. I don't know. Aaron Judge with the injury risk. He's probably up there too. I don't know. I couldn't stick to 3. Sorry. I was trying to give different names. I'm going to say, whatever. I'll say Betts, Strider, and Judge.
Scott White. He's got the meats. Sweats. We're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.